Okay, welcome back to our series on Plato's Republic. We are going to be picking back up with Book 2 of the Republic, and where we left off was in the Reeves translation on page 46, the Stephanus number 368D, somewhere around there is where I want to begin. Okay, so we have this discussion ongoing between Glaucon and Adeimantus and Socrates, on the other hand, concerning the value, specifically the intrinsic value of justice, right? What is justice, and why is it better than injustice? Why is it more valuable than injustice? And what Socrates does here at this point in the dialogue is he makes, as I alluded to at the end of the last podcast, an interesting kind of maneuver. What he does is he turns to an analogy, which we're all familiar with. Analogies, they're sort of examples to illustrate a point in a different context, maybe slightly different relationships going on or what have you, but it's still illuminative or informative to a certain extent. And so an analogy is in some ways truth bearing, meaning it contains some truth to it if it's a good analogy, right? It carries some understanding, some truth to help you see what the original point that was being made, what that was. But an analogy is also, in another sense, false. In a quite literal way, it's false, right? So you don't want to think of an analogy as just as flat-footed, straightforward, overly simplistic, literal rendition of the original point. So here's what I mean. Like when you're trying to explain, I don't know maybe you talked about this in a high school biology class or something, what a cell is, the teacher may have said, well, a cell is like a little city, and you have these parts of the cell which are the highways in the cell, and then these parts, these are like the cars that carry the nutrition or whatever between the different places in the cell. And the things that drive the car are these other parts of the cell, and yada yada, right? And you have all these different parts of the cell that are kind of being compared in an analogical way to the workings of a city. Now, it would be pretty foolish to think that that's quite literally a city, but there is something city-like about it, which is why it is a fruitful example, a fruitful analogy. And so the thing to keep in mind right off the bat, because this is going to be a significant point that's going to reoccur at the end of this book when we get to the discussion of the noble lie, or the lie that can be told. This will come up down the road, but what you see is that analogies are in some ways lies. Now they're not bad lies, but they're lies in a certain sense. I guess you could call them lies. Now that's maybe within our context, there might be various connotations associated with the notion of lie, but I think what's going on, what Plato has in mind, is when you think of an analogy, there's something truthful and informative and good about the analogy, but there's also something false, something incomplete, something that could lead you astray, right? And so the thing that you have to do if you're wanting to understand through an analogy is you have to hold on to those things which are true and good, and pay attention to and distinguish those from the things that are false, right? So that way you don't get hung up on the false things, because you might think, well, if this is a highway, why is it so small? The highways aren't that small. The cell can't be like a city because it's just teeny tiny. The idea is you're not quite understanding the use of the analogy in this situation. It's a type of pedagogical or teaching device where you use a false story, in a quite literal sense, a false story, to make a point, because there is some truth about the similarities between the two. Okay, and so that's what we get right up front with this maneuver that Socrates makes on 368D. Here's what he says. The investigation we're undertaking is not an easy one. That is to explain why justice is better than injustice, right? Explain, show us, why is justice better than injustice when all the many people would rather do wrong than to have wrong be done to them? Show us why that's wrong, Socrates. So he says this is not easy. In my view, right? It's not easy in my view, but requires keen eyesight. Right? Remember, going back to Glaucon, the name Glaucon literally meaning keen eyesight. So it's Glaucon that brings this to light, that brings this challenge to light, right? So it's a sign of Glaucon is in some ways helping Socrates see the areas that he may have overlooked, and so now he's challenging Socrates to return and to be more careful. Okay, so we need to have keen eyesight. We need to be a little more careful, a little more focused with our thought. And here's how he's going to proceed to do this. So, since we are not clever people, I think we should adopt the method of investigation that we would use if, lacking keen eyesight, we were told to identify small letters from a distance and then notice that the same letters existed elsewhere in a large size and on a larger surface. We would consider it a godsend, I think, to be allowed to identify the larger ones first and then to examine the smaller ones to see whether they are really the same. Okay, so what you have is to really answer the question of why justice is better than injustice. That requires a type of wisdom, a type of knowledge of self, knowledge of human nature that is really difficult for us to arrive at. And one of the reasons that might be is because it's easy for us to deceive ourselves about our motives, right? Think about how difficult it is to figure out why you decided to go to a certain college, right? If you think, oh, because it had good academics, is that actually the case, or is that the case in light of all these other unspecified reasons, and we're not exactly sure we like those reasons, and so we don't really want to draw those to the light, and so we use this other sort of pseudo reason or pseudo justification as the one that we appeal to, because it makes us feel a little better about our decision, or makes us feel a little better about where we are, or who we are. Okay, and that's really hard for an individual to be completely 100% honest with themselves, to really understand what it is to be human. That is, whether they themselves really do desire justice over injustice, because it's easy to say it and not actually mean it, right? So think about the number of times that you may have said you believe something, but then deep down, when your friends aren't around, you start to wonder, do I actually really believe that or not? And you start to question that, and you realize you're kind of scared because you spent your whole life saying you do believe this, and now you're finding yourself questioning it. And so you kind of don't want to confront that possibility, and so it's easy to kind of blind ourselves to what lies deep in the roots of our soul. And so what Socrates is saying, this is just very common to being human. And so rather than just first and foremost immediately focusing on the individual and the individual's preference of justice over injustice to try to make that case, he's going to use what he calls a godsend, a grace. We've been graced or gifted with something that helps us to see and know ourselves as individuals a little bit better. And what is this godsend? It's a larger image of humanity, a larger image of what it means to be human. And this larger image is what we refer to as the city or society, or the family. If you want to even a little kind of smaller still, but still making the same point. It's a way in which you come to understand what it means to be an individual through this bigger, broader exemplification of that. And I've made this point many times, but I think this is also central to the concept, to the notion of the mystical body of Christ throughout Scripture, the idea of the church as an organic whole of many different members, many different parts, each serving their own function, but all kind of working together in like an organic way, which is very, once again, referring back to this example of the Republic, of having all these different parts playing, interacting with each other so that it brings about a single life. That's the goal. That a city, a family, is such that it shares, or it has a single life. So you wouldn't so much say, this is my marriage, and then your spouse would say, no, it's my marriage. I have my marriage and you have yours. Rather, it's something that you share, and so it's an our marriage. And so through marriage, what you get is this reality, which is a unity out of many things, a one out of many, or one in many, and it helps us to better understand what it is to be one, what it is to be just. So the relationships that you have with the other members in society, the relationships that you have with other members in your community, are revelatory or godsends to help you understand your own life, your own individual life better. Okay, so that is that's like the maneuver that Socrates is making, and so it's the first occasion of seeing man as a microcosm. That is, man is a mini universe. Man reveals or contains within him, in a microscopic way, so to speak, or in a small way, the reality of the whole of creation. And so this is a beautiful concept that to know. This is all throughout St. Augustine too. To know myself and to know the creation as a whole is not really two separate acts. If I know myself, I know the other. If I know the other, then I come to know myself. I better know myself when I know the whole of which I am a part. Okay, so this is the way that Socrates proceeds, and he refers to this with the idea, or the the examples of letters, right? So if you're trying to read small letters, which is like trying to understand yourself, which you could think of as you're really close. It's really tiny. It's hard to read yourself. It's hard to get a good view on yourself because, as we said earlier, you're kind of all kind of mixed up, and it's just as it might be hard to read things that are real far away because they're kind of tiny. It's hard to read things that are so close up. Not necessarily that they're tiny, but you can't really get a good focus on it, right? And that's, I think, the case here, is that it's hard for us to read the letters or the logos of our individual existence because we're sort of too close to it, and so we need to see it in an image. And so the city is this godsend of these larger letters, so we can read what it means to be a soul, what it means to be just, what it means to be virtuous, by looking at what it means for something to be the soul of a city, what it means for there to be justice in the city, what it means for there to be honesty and love in the city. And once you can do that, then you can then make this transition to say, well, the individual is like a city, right? The individual human is a type of single city unto himself. There's a ruler of that individual city. It might be reason. There's different citizens that are subject to that ruler. It might be the different passions, the different desires that you have, and you try to make this comparison, and that's exactly what's going to be happening. So the transition at this stage to politics, which is almost the good majority of the rest of the Republic, is going to seem like a book on political philosophy. But the reason that's the case is because it is an image of man, right? The whole is revelatory of the part in a beautifully paradoxical way, that to understand this whole tells you something about what it means for me to be me. Understanding, going back to the context of marriage, understanding the relationship of marriage gives you a better understanding about who you are. Think of this even just in a more mundane way in terms of friendship. You might think you're a really wonderful person, a really virtuous person. You have a good character, and you have you do all the right things, and you think you're just like, top of the world sort of person. You have this really high view of yourself. Some people call this arrogant or egotistical. Other people call it being a jerk, but you wouldn't call it being a jerk because you don't see things that way. What often's the case is you need someone else to help you to understand that you're being egotistical, right? It's very difficult for an individual to come to realize that they are egotistical. It's difficult for people to come to realize that they're self-centered. What you need to have that understanding come about through seeing and interacting with other people. If you were to stop and realize that all these people that you're interacting with, that you call friends, they don't want to hang out with you. They don't like talking to you. They might even say things like, "You always seem to talk about yourself." It would sort of be a way of revealing to you something about you. So it's often the case that we need others to tell us or show us who and what we are, and that, I think, is the value of community. Right? We don't know ourselves unless we know ourselves in relation to another. And so that's why the Republic is a dialogue which in one ways is about politics, but in another way it's entirely about ethics. It's entirely about understanding of one's self. And I don't think those are different tasks, right? I don't think, meaning I don't think that to arrive at knowledge of political justice, if you were to do that, I don't think you then have to say, okay, we crossed that one off the list. Now let's figure out what individual justice is, what justice is for an individual. We figured out what it is for a society or for a government to be just. Now let's figure out what it is for an individual to be just. I don't think that's the way it works. Rather, these are like Plato puts it. They're the same word written large and small. Okay, and so to understand the one is sufficient for understanding the other. And it turns out that it's easier to have a handle on the larger first, and then you move to the smaller. Okay. So here's how it proceeds. It says, okay, so if we're going to answer the question of the value of justice for an individual human, and why it's more preferable, why it makes for a happier life than injustice, let's turn to the example of the city. And so let us, according to Socrates, let us construct a perfect city. What would be a perfect city? How do cities come about? What would make for a good city? Which is, remember, like saying, what would make for a good human individual? It's like if you were to construct a perfect human being, how would you construct a perfect human being? That's kind of a more complicated question to approach. Socrates thinks it's a little easier to approach the question of what would make for a perfect city. Now, even those are, as for reasons we just said, basically the exact same question. The one about the city seems to be easier to discuss and to address than the other, but we can carry any insight over from one to the other. So that's what we're going to do. So you turn to the city and you ask, okay, how does it come about? Where does it come about? And at 369b5, somewhere around there, what Socrates does, he says, okay, let's construct a city. So how does it come about? And here's what Socrates says. Well then, a city comes to exist, I believe, because none of us is individually self-sufficient, but each has many needs he cannot satisfy. Or do you think that a city is founded on some other principle? And then Adamanta says, no, none. So right off the bat, the origin of a city is the fact that individuals are incapable of living on their own. Okay, so very important fact. It's the neediness of the individual that is the origin of society. It's the fact that no individual can thrive apart from others. Put this in terms of the organism, right? No organ of your body, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the nervous system, the brain, the auditory system. Pick any part of your body. None of those parts can thrive. None of them would really even exist were it not for the others, right? So the lungs wouldn't exist if there wasn't a heart, and the heart wouldn't exist if there wasn't lungs. Everything would just die. There wouldn't be a digestive system if there wasn't a heart. There wouldn't be a heart if there wasn't a digestive system. Now, there's great differences between the heart and the kidneys and the lungs and the gallbladder and all this, right? There's many differences. It's not like they all do the same thing. In fact, they do very different things. But they're all dependent on each other. And what's interesting is that their goal is all the same, right? Even though they have different jobs, they have different functions or purposes, they have a single goal, right? So the heart, in one way, you could say, the goal of the heart is to, pump blood. And the goal of the lungs is to, take in oxygen and put oxygen into the blood. So you could think, the heart and the lungs do different things. In one way, that's true. But in a more fundamental sense, the heart and the lungs and the hands and the teeth and the brain and all of these different parts of the organism are all aimed at the same goal, which is to keep this sucker alive, keep this life going. Let's keep this life going, right? And so they all play a role in keeping the life of the individual going. If any one of those members breaks down and becomes vicious, let's say, or becomes deficient, fails to do its job, fails to thrive, that's going to have effects not just on itself, but on the whole. And this is a really significant point, both politically and individually, that a failure in any one part of society is going to have like ramifications across the board, right? So don't go. I don't really want to speak too much about like standard politics, because I think there's just too many complications in standard politics. But I think about like more domestic politics at a more domestic level, like within a family. There is a type of politics, a type of governance within a family. There's rules and decisions that are made, and people have different roles and different tasks that they all have to try to work out and work together for a common purpose, right? And so this is also the case within, more specifically within a marriage, where you have two people. They each have their own tasks, their own activities, their own desires, their own hopes. But what makes it a marriage is the fact that they have made this act which says, most fundamentally, all of my activity is going to be for the betterment of us, not for the betterment of me, but for the betterment of us. And if each member of the marriage, each spouse makes that vow and lives that vow out, then the marriage will thrive, right? The unity will thrive, just as the heart and the lungs. Now they don't make decisions, but they have, in virtue of their nature, they have just committed themselves, obviously unknowingly, to the betterment of the whole, not the betterment of the part, right? So there's a sense of what the heart is trying to do is not seek its own reward, but to seek the reward of the entire animal. The lung doesn't try to seek its own reward, but to seek the reward of the entire animal. So they're all working for the same thing, but they each need each other. That's the point, right? So society, the minyness of the city, the minyness of community, right? Because community is always a coming together of many things. So that minyness arises through this need for something. We have a shared need. I need something that you also need, that this other person also needs, that we all need. And so we can come together centered around this shared need, and we can better attain that same goal, or that same end or purpose, which we all desire, we all need, when we unify, right? And that's imaged, or that's made an icon of in the organism. It's also something that the city as a whole is an icon of, and images, right? So that, I think, is really kind of a fascinating, insightful thing to think about, so that when you are making decisions about your own life, about what should I do, what's going to make me happy, I think it's fruitful to think about friendship and relationship is in a certain sense, the most important thing that one can have, because it's the foundation for the attainment of what we need, which is unity with the good, unity with what we aspire to. We can't attain that on our own, and so we need others. This is exactly. I mean, this is like the philosophical roots behind marriage, right? There's a need. Man has a need that he can't fulfill on his own, and so he seeks out his other half, his missing half, his missing part, right? That's why we call them partners. Where you're seeking this other individual who will fulfill you in your pursuit of happiness, because you can't be happy alone. And so that's a really significant insight to keep in mind, and it has really practical purposes. And it's unfortunate that we have false how should you put it? False pseudo communities, false communities appearing, and this is in a certain sense, this is a lot of what I think social media has generated. It's not the origin of it, but it certainly has amped it up. It's multiplied this phenomenon of the possibility of thinking you're part of a real community, a real unity, a real society, when you're not, right? Right. Being part of a group, say a group of fans for a certain sports team or whatever, you might think that, yeah, no, this is a community that I belong to. But what really unifies you? It's not like you need anything from this other person. They don't need anything from you. It's not like your life, your existence is integral to their well-being, nor is their life, their existence integral or essential to your well-being, right? It's almost like if certain people were to leave your life, you might be sad, but it's not like you would feel like your life has left you. Now, if you are ever get married, or if you've known people that are married, and the thought of losing your spouse or the thought of losing your children is a scary thought, and partly what makes it a scary thought is the fact that you realize, even if you don't explain it in this way, but you realize that this individual is not just like a nice thing to have, but it's almost as if this individual is my life. So if they were to die, I don't know what it would mean for me to live anymore. If you have lived with this person and shared everything with this person, and you've depended on this person, and then they're gone, it's unclear how you still can go on living. Just as it's unclear how the lungs can go on living once the heart dies, right? It seems like it's not possible for the lungs to live once the heart dies. Just as for many people who have suffered tragedy, it's unclear how they can go on living once their love dies, and that's a great case of a great litmus test, call it, for real community. Can you identify relationships that are such that if you were not to be a part of that, you would feel like you have no life left? Not biological life, but you don't know what would be the point of living. You don't know how you would thrive or be happy without that relationship. Now, this is not a perfect like one-to-one, like if you can identify these, then that means these are like real communities, because sometimes we're mistaken about what we really need in order to be happy. But it is kind of a good litmus test to think about those relationships. And if you don't have any of those, like, oh yeah, no, I'd be sad if my parents die, but it wouldn't really affect me too much. And I'd be sad if I lost my friends, but I bet I could probably, get over it in 2 weeks or so. Obviously, no one wants any of their friends or loved ones to die. It's kind of a morbid thought. But what this does is it helps you to better understand how much of your life is shared with the life of another. And if it's the case that you don't really think that you would lose a part of your life if you lost someone, then it's the case that your life isn't so much like wedded to theirs, or unified or united with theirs. And so the more that you have your life united with another, the more you're going to die when they die, in a analogical sense, right? This is also, I think, at the heart of the relationship between Jesus and Mary, Christ and his mother. The idea of the pain that's shared with the death of Christ is seemingly the loss of the Christian's own life, right? If your life is the life of Christ, then the death of Christ is your death, which is why theologically, we can speak about Christ dying the death of us all, because if you've put on Christ as your life, then when Christ dies, that is your death. And therefore, when Christ rises, it is your resurrection. So your life, the more that you unite yourself with Christ, his life and death and resurrection become yours. Now that's imaged or made an icon in flesh and blood, in a real, mundane way, in our relationships of marriage and the relationships of community, right? So that's I think what's going on in this at this stage of the Republic, and that it's this notion of sharing in a single bigger life through our individual actions. And so there's different parts of the city, right? He talks about the farmers and the merchants and the guardians and all these people that have these different functions, and they all do their own function, and they shouldn't try to do the work of another. This is going to be something that's going to come up down the road. Just as the lung shouldn't try to digest food, it would be bad for the lung if it tried to digest food. The lungs should focus on what lungs do. Likewise, it carries over to the case of the individual, right? These different parts of your soul, the parts of your I'm going to call it your soul, but basically think of it as like your interior life. The part that's supposed to like make decisions, the rational part, the reflective part, you want that to do its job. You don't want decisions to be made in a haphazard way, which would be like, if you just feel hungry, then you act on that feeling. It would be like letting the lungs do something that lungs shouldn't be doing, like digesting food, right? So there's an analogy that's being unfolded here. Okay, and so justice then is found, politically speaking, in the relationship between the different members of society. So the different craftsmen, the farmers, the merchants, right? They all have a function. They all have a role to play. And what justice does is it makes all these different roles come together so that you have a thriving society, right? The 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 farmer makes so much food, more than he as an individual needs, but he makes this much food because he knows other people need this. And the shoemaker makes shoes more than he individually needs because he knows other people need it. And then there's this merchant who's able to help with the trade of these different goods so that everyone gets what they need in exchange for the goods they have. And so then they come to this shared life together. They all kind of thrive in a way that can only happen if they all agree upon and all act out this proper interaction, which is called justice, right? So if one member of society takes more than he needs and does more than he ought to do, or lies or cheats, it's harming the whole. Just as if the one organ of your body takes more oxygen than the other part of your body, it's going to stunt the growth of that other part of your body, which initially it might seem like for that one part, hey, it's not that big of a deal. I'm all beefed up now, and that other part, that's kind of a weak part. But what's going to eventually happen is it's going to cause the whole organism to collapse and to crumble, and it'll even lead to like the self-destruction of that individual part that was unjust. And so that, I think, is ultimately where Socrates is going with this. Okay, and so the way that he talks about, there's a need that everyone has, but this need needs to be distinguished from what he refers to as a luxurious desire, or the city that comes about through need is different from the city that comes about through the desire for luxury. And a lot of people that live don't just desire what is needed in order to be happy, but they desire more. And this is a great tragedy that think about what is needed in order to be happy. And then what happens if you have that? A lot of times people don't see that that's what they need to be happy, and so they think they need more. So this notion of in the Reeve translation, it's referred to as relish, but this desire for more, or for overstepping, going beyond what is actually necessary or needed, seems like it's not that bad of a thing. But what Socrates goes on to argue is this overcomplicates the city. You in order to accommodate luxury, you have to have the city expand, and you get all these additional things that have to fit into the picture, and that's going to lead to a type of war, and then the whole point of this, I think, is that it's this thought that we need more than what has been given to us to make us happy is the root of injustice, the root of thinking that that I can have more than what is actually needed. And that right around, let's see, this is 373a. He discusses this. He says it's not a bad idea to start talking about the city that is luxurious rather than just the city as such. He says it's not a bad idea, for by examining such a city that is a luxurious city, we might perhaps see how justice and injustice grow up in cities. So he says it's helpful to look at like the ideal city, but it's also helpful, meaning insightful, to look at cities that go awry, cities that start out well, but then they catch a fever. They, as he calls it, the feverish city, the city that catches an illness, and it starts to corrupt. where does this corruption come from? And what he says is, in particular, we cannot just provide them with the necessities that we mentioned at first, such as houses, clothes, and shoes. No, instead, we will have to get painting and embroidery going and produce gold and ivory and all sorts of everything of that sort. Isn't that so? So the idea is that you get this elaboration beyond need, which causes there to be this turmoil, this tension, this unrest between. It's not just that the farmer has to farm and thrive as a farmer to be happy. The farmer needs something more. The farmer's got to have ivory. The farmer has to have luxury, which is something in addition to farming. And so you're starting to I think see that the source of injustice for Plato, I think, turns on this desire for something more than what is needed. It's also worth noting that the Stoic tradition, the Stoic ethical tradition, finds a lot of its roots in Plato, and so there's this tradition, this teaching, Stoicism, which holds that what you can control has a great effect over your happiness. Certain things you can't control, whether it's 105 degrees in Kansas, I don't have any control over. What I do have control over is whether or not I have expectations about like sweating in June or July in Kansas when I walk outside, right? If I sort of have these hopes and dreams that if I go outside, maybe I won't get hot, maybe it won't be humid, and I go out there and I'm like, darn it, it's hot and it's humid, and that upsets me because I have this expectation that things could go my way. But what's important to keep in mind is, in reality, I don't have control over whether or not it's going to be hot or humid. So I shouldn't like place my expectations, unrealistic, given the things that I don't control. I shouldn't have unrealistic expectations. And so if my expectations are realistic, meaning if I can learn to say, well, if I go outside and it's hot and humid and I just start sweating like a pig in June because it's 105, that's just what happens in Kansas. I shouldn't get upset about that. I can't control that. That's nothing that should get me down because I don't have any control over that. It's almost like you have to abandon yourself to the providence at hand. There's actually a lot of similarities between the notion of abandonment to divine providence and Stoicism in a certain sense. And so if I can learn to say, okay, certain things I don't have control over, so I'm just going to consign or resign my will to whatever happens, I'll be a much happier person, a much more fulfilled person. And likewise, if I condition or train myself to desire things that are difficult for me to get, like if I only when I drink, if I only drink the best bourbons, then I find myself not being able to partake in that very often because it's sort of costly. And so then I could spend a lot of my time whenever I do have cheaper bourbon, getting all upset and frustrated because I don't have that good stuff. Oh, remember how good that other stuff was? This stuff is just really crappy. The actions that I've done that have made me expect or to think or to desire beyond what is necessary have the ability to make me not appreciate what I do have. And so the Stoic tradition was basically this attempt to find happiness in the things that you have control over, right? And not in the things you don't have control over. And that's kind of, I think, similar to what's happening here, is that happiness is going to be found in the need that we have in coming together for this shared purpose of forming a community in pursuit of our common well-being or common good. But once we start desiring more than that, then we start to set up unrealistic hopes and dreams and expectations that we can't carry out. It's too difficult to carry out, and so it actually leads to our unhappiness. It seems like a life of luxury, according to Socrates, initially might be desirable because it leads to even a better way. I mean, imagine if you had, as he puts it, not just you had chairs, but you had chairs with cushions. Think about how great that would be. But then you think, okay, what would go into cushions? You would have to have a whole group of people that were making cushions, and then what about the people that can't, get the cushions? And so the whole notion of, once you add a luxury, you complicate the scenario in an unnecessary way, and then it becomes more difficult to govern and hold it all together, especially since it's no longer need that's holding it together, but it's sort of frivolous desire that is the origin of luxury, and so it's not something that I think all will agree upon as needed. So the origin of politics, the origin of I think even of family life, is that all need to come to understand, or to come to see, what is the one thing that is needed by all of us. There's one thing that we all need, and therefore that we should all unify on to attain. So the pursuit of the one thing that's needed is the goal of politics, and justice is what brings the many together in order to attain that one thing that's needed, that no individual can attain on their own. Okay, so then the way that this we'll push on, keep pushing on through the Republic. We'll try to bring this to a close here pretty soon. But there's these different roles, these different tasks of the citizens in the city, in the polis. The polis is the Greek word for basically city. It's the root of politics. So I'll refer to the polis, or the city. Has these different roles that need to be fulfilled if the city is going to thrive. One of which is the guardian, and that's going to be something. That's going to be a role or function that is discussed at great length throughout the Republic. But you could think of the guardian as the individual or the individuals who are capable of, or their job is, put it that way, their job is to oversee and to hold everything together, and to keep other things from the outside from destroying the city. So the guardian is basically the protector, the one that keeps things from destroying the city. Another way of putting it, as I just said, is the job is to hold everything together. And the way that you hold everything together is by knowing how they all fit together, right? So it's important to not just have a lot of power, but to have knowledge and understanding about how to use that power. So the guardian is someone who has to have wisdom and knowledge, because they have to know how all the different parts come together to form a single organism, right? So the you could think of them as a type of ruler, but it's a ruler whose function or whose job is not to make the many things serve him, but for him to serve the many so that they can thrive and form a whole. And interestingly, that's his position, that's his membership in the whole. So it's not like the guardian or the ruler stands outside of the whole and tries to unify it. Say, oh, those simple-minded people, they don't know how to live their lives. I'm going to help them unite and live their life. Rather, the guardian is someone who is able to be within the community, not on the outside, kind of lording his control, lording his guardianship over, but it's within the community, but whose function is to also then have a transcending view of the whole to bring it all together. And so this is why Socrates refers to the guardian as someone who has to be by nature philosophical. That is, they have to be by nature someone who's capable of loving wisdom, loving understanding. They have to desire to see the logos of things, or the logic of things, the reason of things. Right? These are all basically synonyms. The philosopher is the person who desires to understand the purpose or the reason behind why all things do what they do. The farmer only focuses on farming, right? Which is an important thing for farmers to do. The farmer has to focus on, when to plant, how much to plant, days to avoid planting, and all the details of farming and the care for the crops. The farmer doesn't worry about what the shoemaker's doing, and in fact, the farmer would probably become a bad farmer if it started worrying about other people. It'd be like the backseat driver type of principle that, whenever you have a backseat driver, the driver never drives well. And so each of these different members, these different parts, all need to focus on their own occupation, metaphorically, or their own function. It's the guardian whose function is what you can call a meta function in a way. Its function is to unite all those other functions into a whole. And so it's a type of a transcending function, a function that transcends any particular function to bring about the unity of the many parts. And this is once again thinking about the individual organism. You have all these different parts or bits and pieces of an organism, all these different organs that all have their own function, their own purpose, that get unified. And how they all interact, it's a really complicated question, but I would imagine there's something like, in a purely physiological terms, something like the brain is probably the overseer of how all those parts interact. So when one part is, goofed up, a different part might try to cooperate that, and that all gets, or compensate for that, and that all gets kind of navigated through the brain. The brain's kind of the part of the organism that does the overseeing of the whole, even though the brain is still a part of the organism. That's what I think is really significant about this, is that the ruler is not different or other than the society or the community. The ruler is a member of the community, but a member of the community which also can step back and oversee or transcend the various parts to kind of see it all together and to try to organize it all. Okay, so this is kind of what parents do with children. Children don't worry about the details. The parent is a member of the family, but it's a member of the family that also has to kind of step back and think about not just what we're doing today, what we're having for dinner today, but kind of plan things out long term. Whereas the kid, if you think about your own childhood, you wonder, man, it's kind of amazing how we always had food on the table. I guess it was my parents that planned that out. it's something kind of like that. The farmer might stop and say, wow, it's kind of amazing how we have this thing called society going. I guess it's the ruler that planned all that out, or the guardian that planned all that out. Right? And so the one that brings all the different parts together so that they can mutually interact and engage with each other to bring about the joint fulfillment of a single life is the function of the guardian. And that's why the guardian must be philosophical, because it must be the one that's capable and even desirous, more so desirous of seeing. The concept of seeing is going to be important, but seeing or understanding how things are, why things are, the reason things are. That's all going to be important for the function of unifying. Okay, and the last thing that I want to address is this notion of the lie. So the guardian, in order to do this, they have to have a proper education, right? So if you're going to be philosophical, if you're going to have this ability to know how all things fit together, how all the different parts of society all work together so that they jointly cooperate to form a common whole, putting it in a more mundane way, if you're going to know which laws are just and which laws aren't, that is, if you want to know how to properly, govern society, you have to have a good education. And so the guardians need to be educated well. And one of the things that happens right off the bat, Socrates points out, is the education of the guardian is the most important thing. And so this book is actually, the Plato's Republic is actually a book on education, because what ethics and politics and even theology here at the end of book 2, it touches in theology. It all has to do with education. How is it that we are educated? And if we're educated well, certain things will happen. Certain lives will result. And if we're educated poorly, other lives will result. And so the education of the guardian is the sort of the crucial aspect to what makes a guardian a guardian, what makes a ruler a ruler. They have to be educated well, and it has to happen from the earliest stages or ages. So the children have to be educated well. And so how are children educated? Well, they're told stories, right? So your very first educational experiences came through stories that you learned, not textbooks that you read, but stories that your parents or your family members told you. And what Socrates is pointing out is the stories have to be good stories, because there's this possibility of the stories lying or deceiving you, leading you to think that certain things are a specific way when they're actually not that way. Thinking that the gods can be bad when perhaps in reality it's not possible for the gods to be bad. And so if you were educated to think a certain way, then that's going to affect the way that you govern, right? Especially if you think a certain way about God, that's going to affect the way that you govern, because all things, it seems like what's going on here in the Republic, all things are an image of the good. All good things are an image of the perfection of good. So you could think about all things are in the image of God. And so if you have a false view of God, then that's going to automatically lead you to a misunderstanding of everything, right? All the parts are now going to be misunderstood. So if you think of God as greedy, then perhaps you would think of marriage and the relationship in marriage as greedy, because marriage is an image of God, and so if God's this way, then the marriage would sort of take on those characteristics. And so you would have to tell good stories to children if you're going to educate them well. And what good stories are is they're a type of lie, he calls it, as this is what we said at the very beginning of this podcast. There's a type of lie, but it's not a bad lie. It's a noble lie, meaning they're 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 not exactly they're like Aesop's fables in a way, right? So that yeah, there's not talking wolves, and this isn't literally how the cow got spots, but there's a moral to the story. There's a point or a purpose or a reason to the story that is the whole point of telling the story in the first place. And so you tell these stories to children, and they're engaging and they're fun to listen to. And the purpose is that they pick up on the point of the story, not so that they can like hone in and hang on the false details, right? Because children will be able to wean off the false details as long as the logos of the story is true. That's what's going to stick with you. So if you tell bad stories which have a false logos, or if they're as you would refer to it as a true lie, a real lie, meaning not just the allegorical aspect is false, but the heart of it, the moral is false, then that's going to really deceive and corrupt children. They're gonna have a bad, corruptive education because they'll think that bad things are good and good things are bad, which is far worse, far more of a lie than if they think lions can talk, right? So the point is, it's okay to tell quote lies to people, to especially he has in mind children, but the lie is not so much like you're telling them something false, but rather you're telling them something allegorical, something that's an image, something that's an analogy for the point of being able to unite them with what's actually true, which is very different from the real lie or the true lie, which is you tell them something so that they don't arrive at what's true. That's where the danger or the trouble comes, and so the guardian needs to be able to know which quote lies are good and which ones are bad, or another way of putting it, which stories have a good moral and which stories have a bad moral, and that's going to ultimately lead you into this necessity of the guardians having to have knowledge of what's good, and knowledge not just of good things, but of what makes something good, what makes something true, what makes something, knowledge, or what makes something virtue. So the whole point of this is now moving into education, because it ties up with wisdom, and you can't rule unless you have this type of knowledge over how should these things, all these different parts fit together. How is it that they would fit together in a way that would be good for it? The ruler has to have knowledge prior to being able to rule, because otherwise it'll formulate laws that could be self-corruptive. Okay, so that basically brings us to the end of book 2. We'll pick up next time with book 3.